What is up, chat? Today we are reacting to the truth about basketball in the 80s. And this was highly recommended. As you guys know, we've been running a series just reacting to old school basketball. And if you guys are new to my channel, make sure to subscribe. So today I'm really excited. I don't really know anything about the 1980s or anything basketball related that happened in the 1980s. Because, I'm Gen Z, so everything's new to me. So let's get straight into the video.
If you've ever been a part of NBA debates that involve discussions about the 1980s, then you know that people can be pretty divided on their opinions on the style and quality of basketball that came from that era, and even about what that era represented. As someone who loves that era of NBA basketball and who has personally watched hundreds of hours throughout my life of it, I feel like I can offer a bit of clarification on how people can accurately view this decade.
I'll give you guys my thoughts on 80s basketball before the video starts. Honestly, I feel like it was very rough and there was no such thing as foul baiting. You know how people always try to draw fouls, flopping? Like, it was realistically like everyone was trying to do something. No one's trying to do some extra stuff and call the refs and snitch all the time. Like, people were really getting down to it. I feel like that's what it is. You guys let me know down below.
I want to start by tackling several aspects about the decade and talk about what's true, what isn't true, and what you might have not known. First, we'll start with one of the most argued over topics, defense. The current perception of 80s defense depends on who you ask. If you ask a fan from an older generation, more often than not, they're going to tell you that defense was greater at that time, that back then, they played grown man defense. They would always punish each other physically back then, and nowadays, they can barely even
Based on what I'm seeing, it's just a lot of fouls, though.
touch each other. This is their narrative. But if you ask a lot of younger fans, they don't have to deal with the nostalgia bias. But they also have the disadvantage of not actually watching those games. Those younger fans will say things like defense was less advanced back then, and that it was easier to score and not as physical as advertised. There's even compilation videos on.
I wouldn't say that. I feel like the defense then was better, but like as in a foul standpoint, like you can get away with fouls. I wouldn't say that though.
YouTube of bad defense from the 80s, where guys are given little resistance and minimal hustle and effort is on display. So what gives? You've got two different groups saying totally opposite things about a specific decade. Well, as usual, the truth lies somewhere in the middle and a little off to the side. Let's start with the facts and details we know about 80s basketball. In today's current NBA, teams average 111.7 points per game, which is really high. It's actually the highest since the days Wilt Chamberlain played basketball. Now, the 1980s was actually very close in total offense.
Was Wilt Chamberlain that dominative? Was he going that crazy? Cause I still can't process him scoring 100 points. I literally don't even know anything about Wilt Chamberlain. All I know is that he had a 100-point game and it wasn't on footage at all.
Throughout that decade, teams usually averaged around 109 points per game, which is also a lot of offense. Not only that, but throughout the 80s, teams shot 48% from the field compared to today's 46%. In fact, in terms of field goal percentage, the 1980s were the most efficient decade in all of NBA history. I could break down all the statistical league averages in detail, but here's what you need to know. Today, the league is very high scoring. The 2000s were very low, the late 90s were very low, the early 90s were high, and the 1980s were very high. So immediately, at face value, it appears the 80s defensive era narrative has been pretty overblown, based on how many points they were scoring and how efficiently they were scoring. But what we need to understand was that the biggest contributing factor to this was the pace of play. The 1980s was some of the most fast break transition.
Oh my god. Talk about fast breaks. When we reacted to that 1984 Lakers vs Celtics game, I was genuinely shocked how fast paced it was. Like, everyone is just getting to their spot, passing the ball quick. Now people try to drain the shot clock. It's really different now.
Heavy basketball the league has ever seen. In today's game, most of the very high scoring comes from the inflation of three-point attempts. But in the 80s, it was more due to the fact that most games looked like a track meet. The Showtime Lakers of the 80s were famous for this, since Magic Johnson was always pushing the tempo. But it wasn't just them. Many teams played a fast break style, like the Denver Nuggets, who were notorious for their incredibly fast and potent offense, but also a terrible defense. The Pistons, despite their defensive perception, also ran the fast break a lot and could score a ton of points. And there were also teams like Phoenix, Dallas, Portland, and Philadelphia. So transition basketball was pretty much the norm in those days. And what do you get with a lot of fast breaks? Plenty of layups and dunks.
I swear to you guys, this doesn't happen now. People are really afraid of getting injured. There's not a lot of fast breaks that happen unless it's stolen and it goes to the other end. I literally don't see this type of style anymore. It's crazy.
Which are easier opportunities. Easier opportunities equals a higher field goal percentage. The highest scoring game in NBA history actually came from this era, which was on December 13th, 1983, when the Detroit Pistons defeated the Denver Nuggets in triple overtime, 186 to 184. What? These were the Pistons, who were known for their physicality, their Jordan rules, and their overall punishing defense. So how in the world could this defensively revered squad be involved in a game where the final score was in the 180s? It's starting to sound like this whole defensive era thing is just a huge myth.
Yes.
Well, we're not done yet. And that brings us to the next aspect that goes somewhat hand in hand with this one, physicality. One of the biggest influences in the different eras that people don't usually think of is the flagrant foul rule. Most of you know the details of the flagrant foul, but for those who don't, it's a foul where unnecessary roughness is used on another player. Many times it's called when there is a blow to the head or strong physical contact that was in no way a play on the basketball. Committing this flagrant foul can be devastating to the team that does it, because it results in either 1 or 2 free throws and maintained possession of the ball, and often an ejection of the player who committed the foul. This is a pretty good rule. It keeps players protected, it keeps players from unnecessary serious injuries, and it often keeps tense moments from escalating into really ugly situations. And this rule did not exist until 1990.
That is genuinely insane. I'm gonna make a prediction. I feel like they made the rule just cause of the Pistons. Well, this kind of okay.
That means that in the fullness of the 1980s, almost every hard foul was just considered a common foul. If this is the case, doesn't it make sense to hit the offensive player a little harder to make sure he doesn't get an and one? Doesn't it make sense to put a little extra?
There's no way that was a real play, that he was just punching him. What? Chat, can you guys let me know down below how did this work out back in the day? And did a lot of players get injured during this time or not really? And you guys told me that the NBA now gets injured way more than back then. I'm genuinely curious though. Let me know down below your thoughts.
On it if it means they think twice before attacking the basket next time? The games in the 80s weren't always played with this physically punishing nature, only when they needed to be, like for the Jordan rules or in the NBA playoffs. In the postseason, where every possession and every point counts, players would often exercise this freedom for the sake of trying to win the ball game. It wasn't that this generation of players was naturally more violent, it's that they were allowed to be. The truth is, just like modern basketball, there were players who played great defense, and there were players who played terrible defense. The key differences were the high-octane pace of play and the permissible hard fouls. In the 1980s, it was possible to have both a league where teams could score into the 120s, and a league where games would become very physical and the style would change significantly. There was a term back in the day that was common among players, coaches, referees, and commentators: setting the tone. You don't hear it much anymore in today's game, but back then it was very important, and it essentially meant that they were coming out of the gates to start the game, setting the tone for the game's pace, style, and physicality. Nowadays, the game is much more
So that's like they had a hard foul towards the beginning of the game, so it set the tone and intimidation, or let me know.
consistent in terms of its style and physicality, because the rules have become much more clear on what is acceptable and what's not, what is permissible contact and what isn't. In the 80s, it was easier for players to control the game and more difficult for the referees to control the game, because pretty much anything goes. For example, it was common for teams like the Celtics and Pistons to be even more physical in matchups with the Lakers, trying to take them out of their finesse style of basketball. They came out of the gates, setting the tone, and oftentimes, it worked. The next aspect is athleticism. You've heard it and I've heard it. The idea that players back then were slower, weaker, and smaller than modern day athletes. Is it somewhat accurate? Probably. Is it also grossly exaggerated?
I truly do think it is a way difference because you have way more technology that people can have their hands on. You know, you can watch videos on YouTube to figure out the workouts to get more athletic. Back then, I feel like it was more limited. What you knew is what you knew, and what you got told is what you got told, right? Right?
Probably that too. In the past 10 years of modern NBA basketball, the average height of the NBA player is 6 foot 7 inches tall and weighs 220.7 pounds. In the 10 years of the 1980s, the average height was also 6 foot 7 inches tall and the average weight was 207 pounds. So although they stood just as tall side to side to one another, the major difference was the weight of the players at nearly 14 pounds less. Simply put, this difference was usually made up of muscle mass. Modern players have an advantage with modern training methods, eating habits, and fitness routines. Guys in the 80s were simply skinnier, but many of them were still very athletic and had lean muscle. They just overall looked a little less physically imposing than today's players. This has partially led some newer fans to criticize this era when they're looking at some of the most non-threatening and least athletic players of the 80s. They'll say things like the league was packed with part-time plumbers and accountants.
Wow.
I hate it when people say this though,
Wow.
because it's easy to take small samples and condemn an entire era for it. It's almost like when people think of the state of athleticism in 2020, they automatically think of Giannis. And when they think of the state of athleticism in the 90s, they think of Jeff Hornacek. The problem with that is that it's erring on an extreme example and isn't a proper survey of the athleticism of the league as a whole at that time. Want another example? Picture 20 years from now. People are hating on LeBron James, saying he didn't play in a strong era of real athleticism, and here's their future arguments. How strong is LeBron's era in 2016 when he lost the MVP race to a guy who struggles to dunk a basketball? How strong could
Oh my God! What about the why the LeBron jabs? Like we were enjoying it. You didn't have to diss my favorite player of all time. You know, you didn't have to, but it's okay. It's okay.
that era have been when one of the best players in the league was someone who was consistently overweight? In LeBron's era, he played against plumbers like JJ Redick and Kelly Olynyk. How weak were the athletes in LeBron's era if a guy who was only 5 foot 9 inches tall could average nearly 30 points per game? Don't you guys see how ridiculous and biased these statements are? Although many of the statements are true to an extent, they're cherry-picking details
That genuinely did change my perspective, though. What that comparison that did change my perspective.
and acting as if it's the complete picture. They're completely lacking context, but statements like these are usually just emotionally motivated agendas in order to build a negative narrative about a player that they don't like as much as their favorite player. People do this all the time with the 1980s. But when you look around the league in that era as a whole, you see guys who were incredible athletes like Dominique Wilkins, Kenny Skywalker, Michael Jordan, Daryl Dawkins, Charles Barkley,
my God.
Gerald Wilkins, Julius Erving, Sean Kemp, Xavier McDaniel, Hakeem Olajuwon, Karl Malone, James Worthy, Tom Chambers, Daryl Griffith, David Thompson, Terrence Stansbury, Clyde Drexler,
Wow.
Larry Nance, Dennis Rodman, Orlando Woolridge, David Robinson, Roy Hinson. Seriously, do I need to keep going? Many people are just too young or weren't watching at that time to know about a lot of the freakishly gifted athletes of the 90s.
Why is there so much good athletes that are really good at dunking in that era? I feel like they do have more than us now. What? How many dunkers do we got now? We got Ja, Anthony Edwards. We don't have a long list like that. Oh my God.
1980s, just like how 20 to 30 years from now, many people won't know about many of the great athletes we watch in today's game. The final aspect is competition. I'll make this one quick, but since the 1960s when the Boston Celtics ruled the basketball world, the 1980s were the toughest era of competition in
What?
terms of how hard it was to break through and win a championship. That was because the 80s were, as I call it, the era of super teams. There was so much talent at the top of the league, and you had several dynasty-worthy rosters consistently duking it out. Part of that was how the league was rich with stars, but the other part was how there were only 23 teams in the league. Imagine today's
What?
NBA, and then we eliminate 7 of the teams.
What? There was no Portland Trailblazers, Phoenix Suns, Memphis Grizzlies, Orlando, or the Knicks. That's actually crazy.
And then distribute the talent from those teams to the remaining 23 teams. Naturally, what would you get? A handful of super teams. This was essentially the NBA in the 1980s. Look around the teams of the league and who won championships in that decade. If you had just one or two stars on your team in that era, you're not winning a championship.
What?
You needed 3 or 4 and a deep bench just to even win one ring. With all this being said, am I saying that the 80s was the greatest era of basketball? Not necessarily, but it was a great era, with a crazy history, and with a fantastic collection of talent and athletes, and it certainly deserves your respect. Let me know in the comments section which decade you
Chat, that kind of changed my perspective on 80s basketball. I didn't expect it to be like this. What he was saying, I thought it was just like Larry Bird and Magic Johnson's teams just dominating the NBA. But there was a lot of teams that were good. I apologize. I no disrespect to the 80s basketball. It's just that I wasn't educated, but now I'm educated. And I appreciate you guys for educating me. And I appreciate you guys all for the support. 3,000, we got 3,000 subscribers now. That's really crazy to me. From where I came from to now, I'm so thankful. And this is the end of the video also, so recommend me some more stuff to react to. And make sure to like, comment, subscribe. And I'll catch y'all next time. Yes, sir.